want to welcome all of you here. Hopefully you all had a chance to go to Rocky Mountain Junior High and take just a minute. We have the Scopie meeting tonight for SR 177. If you have any questions on that, we can provide you with some information and some email if you can contact. We are really happy to have Tina Cannon here with us tonight, who's going to do a special presentation for us. She is our state auditor, and if you have questions, we hope you'll make sure and address those, and you can get all the information that you need. So thank you for coming, and we'll turn the time to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. I feel a little funny with this small of a group to have a microphone, but apparently YouTube, that will make me at all nervous to know I'm being filmed. I am Tina Cannon. I am the state auditor. Let me give you a little bit of oversight over. We're going to talk tonight about the public infrastructure districts, but why I'm here to talk about public infrastructure districts. The state auditor is, where am I going? Wrong direction. Oh, we missed all those. All right. The state auditor has oversight by the Constitution and then by statute. I am the post auditor of all public accounts. So that means I have oversight over not just federal funds coming into the state of Utah, but also all state funds and local government funds. So if it's county, city, school districts, special service districts, the state auditor has oversight over all of those. We manage those through local government. We have oversight over about, between spending and assets, about $100 billion across the state of Utah. Public infrastructure districts are part of our oversight of what we oversee. So I approach this from an oversight perspective, and I'm giving you the oversight of what we have seen as we have implemented this quite new in public infrastructure districts across the state. So this was a presentation done strictly for public infrastructure districts, but I do see it was noticed as tax increment financing. So hopefully we will still have those slides in here. Okay. So let's back up a little bit for how development typically gets done. Now, in my life before this, I spent 28 years in the private sector as a tax accountant with specialty in real estate taxation. So I do understand development. I've seen it from the private sector quite a bit. When I was elected in Morgan County, I spent 6 years in Morgan County on their council. And for 4 of those years, planning and zoning was my portfolio. So I spent a lot of time also looking at this from a decision side on the government side. So traditional development usually goes with a concept. You start with a concept, and that concept you would bring a group of investors together, secure financing, you build it out. And what makes it different from what we're going to talk about here is you transfer ownership with a clean title. Typically, you would accumulate over time the expenses that go into a development. You capitalize those expenditures, and the developer who owns it would then expense those expenditures as they recoup the cost and they sell portions of the project. So the point here is 100% of the development cost is borne by the developer. Funding by tax increment financing changes that as a fundamental rule. This is the way that you can finance portions of the development and up to 100% of the development through a tax increment financing that is made available to the developer. Now, there are 5 different types of tax increment financing that are available through statute in the state of Utah. And these are your 5. You've got RDAs, or redevelopment areas, community reinvestment areas, your CRAs, your infrastructure financing districts, public infrastructure districts, or PIDs, or development authority created PIDs. Now, these are super PIDs on number 5. We call them super PIDs in our office because these are usually done by special service districts. Think Inland Port, The Point, MIDA. Those are all, they fall under number 5. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the first 2, the RDAs and the CRAs. These are financed, these are created under Utah Code 17C. They are distinct legal entities from a city or a county. However, they use existing tax lines that are used. So usually this is an agreement of the taxing entities, and revenue is redirected from the existing property tax lines. This is what makes it different. You have an agreement between the county, the school district, and the city. If it's within a city, or if you're in a county, it's a school district in the county. But you are redirecting existing tax lines that are already there and are already on your tax statement that are going out, and you're redirecting those funds. In the case of the school district that agrees, you're taking education money and putting it into typically an economic development project. This is usually an agreement of the entities because they see this as a long-term investment into a more profitable project for the county or the city. So they look at this long-term, and the school district, because you'll see an increase in the value of the property with that project. So RDAs and CRAs are different from the others we're going to discuss because they use existing tax lines. So, and they're usually in agreement, and they are a short-term entity. So for example, most RDAs you probably have, do you have one here in the city, an RDA or a CRA?
Not yet.
So in Morgan County, our RDA was unincorporated area of Morgan County, and it's typical in most cities that do an RDA or a CRA, the same city council or county council, county commission are the board of the CRA or the RDA, and they direct where that funding goes. And so there is an Open Public Meetings Act requirement for them, and you are reporting back to the public in the same way what you are doing with their tax dollars differently with an RDA and a CRA. That is an interesting distinction there, because that is not what happens with a public infrastructure district. Okay. Oops. I keep hitting the wrong one. Okay. So then we have, this is a new one created under 17B-2A, and this infrastructure financing district is limited in what it does. And we don't, as an oversight perspective, we don't have as many problems with the infrastructure financing districts because of these limitations. They can only contiguously annex. That means you have to be touching any land that you annex in. You can't uncontiguously annex in. Again, the property tax funds the project, and it's limited to public infrastructure, specifically excluding facilities or buildings owned or to be owned by a private person. But again, when you move into these, you are creating a new line of property tax. This is not existing tax. This is a new line of property tax. And the money from this property tax line that is created with these districts is then taxed on the owners within the area of the public infrastructure district or in the infrastructure district. So you are taking a specific area and you are creating a new tax line, and 100% of the property owners within that area are now paying this property tax, which is then imposed by the county the same way the other property taxes are imposed. They said that by the county or the state tax commission if it goes across county lines. And then it pays a bond that is taken out by the developer to pay for the infrastructure that was put into that area. So you're creating a new tax line. You're implementing that tax to pay the bond that then pays the developer for the infrastructure within that area. So it's a new tax line. And all of these that you're going to hear from here are a new tax line imposed upon the owners within that property. Now we get into the public infrastructure districts. So these can be created by cities, counties, development authorities, or a basic special district. You again need 100% of the property owner's consent within this area. So typically what we have seen these do is you have a development project. It is a 100% owned of the owner by the developer project, or if they have a group of owners who agree, and then they come to a county or a city or a special service district, and they ask for development authority within the new district. What is happening is the same thing as before. We're asking for a new tax line that will tax the owners of the new district. Now, the county or the city is appointing the board. So that appointment of the board becomes the developer, and because it has to be the owner. So you are appointing the developer or the owners of the property to be on that board. And then that board controls what happens within that infrastructure district. Where it's going awry is that the implementing county or city is not keeping track of who the board is, because all of these have to report back to the state auditor what you are doing within the district. So you have to track who the ownership maintains, and then, how many of you are familiar with governmental accounting? I see a lot of us here. No. Governmental accounting is different than public accounting, and it's different for several reasons. When an entity creates a public infrastructure district, whether it is a county or a city, it is creating an entity the same way. You need to look at this as the same as creating a special service district. Because you are creating a separate legal entity, yes, but because you are providing a service for that area, you are creating a distinct component unit that has to be included in your financial statements from here on. So everything that happens within that district now becomes part of your financing limitations, and you cannot report your financial statements or turn over your financial statements until you have reported what this discrete component units financial statements as well, because it is your district. So this is where we see people getting into non-compliance, and why we have a concern in the state auditor's office over where these are going. Typically, as I pointed out, in the private sector, what I would see as an accountant, as the project progressed, I was getting updates from the developer over what was being spent, and then we were including that in their financial statements as a ongoing project where we were capitalizing the expense, but we were getting a report through that process. I am not seeing that happen with counties and cities with public infrastructure districts. The first that they hear about it is when the bond is asked for. So I went to a debt financing commission meeting. It's a statewide commission, so this was one of the super PIDs that was doing it. They were non-compliant. We had no idea who was on the board, and they were asking for a $56 million bond. They get out of control really, really quickly, so I caution you that if you go to this decision, you need to know going in that you are responsible for them, and you have to track and report to the state auditor's office who was on the board and how it's progressing. Okay. In public infrastructure districts, you have annexation and withdrawal of property by a resolution of the PID board and the creating entity. You have to have 100% of the property owners to agree. So it can expand beyond its original boundaries, but you have to get all of these to agree. So if it's going to expand, it needs to get consent of the new owners to expand and the authorizing authority. Where this gets difficult is they have non-contiguous annexation. So that means it can cross county and city lines. So in theory, if I wanted to do something in Hooper, and I apologize, I grew up in Brigham City where we know how to pronounce Brigham City. So if I get it wrong, I do know how to pronounce Manaway. I'm used to that. But if I wanted to do something in Hooper, but Hooper said no, I could go to Brigham City and get Brigham City to say yes, because they all know me since I was born and they like me, so they're going to approve my PID, and then I just annex into my project that I owned 100% of in Hooper, and Hooper gets to like it because I got somebody else to approve it for me. This non-contiguous annexation also means that I can have a quarter, well, I'll show you. So they can cross county and city boundaries. So, as I stated earlier, it is a separate legal entity, but because you have created an entity that you have appointed the majority of the governing board, that's a yes, and there's a financial benefit or burden relationship because it's infrastructure, that relationship exists. It's a component unit of the city if you approve it. So, you are required by 17D-4-205 to report to my office, so that's my legal there. This is an example of non-contiguous annexation. So this is in Richfield. So you can see, as an oversight perspective recorder, what it is like for a governing body that is now tasked with imposing a tax on everyone within those boundaries. And you have to know where those boundaries are. So from an oversight perspective, it becomes a headache very quickly. When it goes across, this is another example, this one's in Utah County. This is they were Firefly, if you can't see it, 1 through 10 kids. These were either a quarter acre or half an acre, but they're not big lots. This is what it looks like now. This is the original one right down here in the corner. And this is what it is now. So, they can grow and grow quickly. And do. And then this is an example of it crossing county lines. So once it crosses county lines, the imposition of the tax is no longer done by the county. It then goes automatically to the State Tax Commission. And John Valentine and I are in agreement this becomes a real problem for the Tax Commission. John is the chair of the Tax Commission, and we have discussed this. It becomes a real problem to be able to track for the State Tax Commission as well. So there are reasons why that is. This goes into some public infrastructure districts. This is your super kids is what we call them in the office, where now, based on what the taxing authority has, or what the legislature has allowed, you can now do public financing of private projects within these areas. So, think the Delta Center within the sports park can now be, even though it is a privately owned facility, it can be financed with the property tax of the surrounding area within that pit. So, all right. All of them have a different definition for infrastructure. What is infrastructure? So, all of them have a slightly different, now it is more than what you would typically see in a development would have been your roads, your power lines, your sewer, water. They have expanded it to be facilities, buildings, remediation. The list is growing. Okay, this is why it matters to us. This is GO bond debt, and the governor is very proud of the state of Utah paying down GO bond debt. This is where PIDs are. When we did this, we found out today it was 212. These are growing exponentially fast. So since we updated these slides a week ago, 10 days ago, we've had another 3 join. And I expect that to continue. This is why it matters. It took them, the original one, and I probably voted for it as a county council member up in Morgan, the original one in 2020. It took from 2019 till May of 2024 to reach the first $1 billion in financing. In the last 16 months, they've added $3 billion in financing. These are a new tax line. So depending on what goes into that public infrastructure district, if you have a affordable housing project and they are comparing square footage only and not property tax lines, they are going to get themselves into a project, into a home or a affordable housing project where they have only taken into consideration what the square footage value is and they have not compared the tax lines. In Morgan County, in the one that I voted for, so I'm taking responsibility for this one, that line on their new tax line to pay that public infrastructure district is $325
on average per month.
Yeah, per month. $325 per month. It's in my ward. I have to go late and sneak in to release this. No, I'm kidding. See, I shouldn't joke because I'm being filmed. But that also, we also have a discussion in our office today. The other thing that concerns me about these is I have 3 kids who are in the housing market. I would never recommend that they buy into one of these because if you're stretching to get into a home and you have an extra tax line that can be, by statute right now, it is allowed to be above all of the other lines put together on your taxes, you will price yourself out of a home or out of a condo or whatever it is that is being financed with these very, very quickly. Because right now, there is not a limit set unless it is set by the city, and cities and counties are not understanding that the limit is higher and they're getting beyond because there's no report back to the state auditor and no checking on the limit. So they're getting out there getting bonds before there's any check on whether or not they've gone over the limit. So we have concerns here because we are tasked with oversight, and yet one county who should remain nameless developed an ongoing feud between the county auditor and the county council because the county council kept saying, why are you collecting tax for these kids? And she's like, because that's my job. And they're like, no, it isn't. And it is her job to implement that tax and to collect that revenue and then submit it for payment of that bond. But that's where our problem is. People are not understanding what their responsibilities are with public infrastructure districts and why we developed this presentation to go out and give so that cities and counties would understand when you put one of these in, you become responsible for how it operates and for the debt that it carries. So this is now included in the debt affordability study for 2025. That debt on public infrastructure districts, because it is implemented, understand that that is not debt carried by the entity, that is debt to be paid by the taxpayer. But it is only being paid, that is currently for public infrastructure districts 4 times the amount that is being carried by the state of Utah in general obligation bonds. That's how high that is now. We have our first project failure. This is why it's going to matter. This is in Colville. Colville had not included Wahali as part of its financial statements since its inception. And they got a letter. The city should have received an auditor alert this week pointing these out because Colville hadn't reported it as part of their financial statements. And they have to go back and restate their financial statements from 22, 23, and 24 to include Wahali. Wahali is in bankruptcy. What happens when these go into bankruptcy is that typically this is a 30-year bond, but they have the ability on these to go 30 to 40 years. I think I went dead, but no matter, they don't care. Anyway, 30 to 40 years, and this is why the extra 10, because now they are paying the interest on this debt with principal from that bond. So by the time the taxpayers, if this sells, the amount of that debt is increasing. Where it matters to Colville, if Colville has a project it needs to do financing for and do a municipal bond for, Wahali's debt now comes into play because the debt limit is counted as part of your financial responsibilities. All right, I think that's it. Yep, that was it. So I'll open it up for questions at that point, or at this point. I will give this to you.
So one question I have, you know how they get and they're not connected anymore?
Non-contiguous annexation.
Yes, but could the person doing that have said, no, we want this to be continuous? I don't know how that got so out there, like Richfield, I didn't even think how.
So you have to have a friendly government now because you have to go back and get their approval. But because you can non-contiguously annex and you can cross city and county boundaries, You don't have to you can go to any city or county to get approval. And some don't mind these at all. And there are some counties that do these quite a bit. So, and it can start. So if you started a project in Washington County and it's going really well, and you go back to Washington County and say, hey, I'm your developer doing this great project for you over here. I'm going to expand it now, and I want to do a project in Box Elder County. I just need you to approve it. They all know him. They all love him. He's a great member of their community. Sure. This is why I tell people, you are now responsible, because what is yet to be determined is if you build it, remember who approved it, who gets to include it in their financial statements, because physically it's located in another community. So these are moving so quickly that the legal ramifications and the governmental accounting standards are not keeping up. So we have issues that are still in question. And one of those big ones is going to be, how do you handle a foreclosure in your area? If these do not finance in those first 10 years, where does it go? Because I should stop telling my kids not to buy into those, because I have $4 billion in financing for them. If they go bad, what do we do? So there are a lot of ifs out there, and I don't have all of those answers. I'm just telling you the problems that we have seen as their oversight.
Two questions. Who crafted this type of funding? And also, out of those 209, I guess 212, do you have any success stories?
Yeah, there are a lot of success stories. Okay, so who crafted it?
Yes.
All of these decisions are done by the legislature creates this policy. So all of these, I don't create the policy, I just get to oversee and be the oversight over the policy. I did not do this. So, and they control it, which is why we've done this presentation for them and pointed out the problems. We have some recommendations for them to how to, where some fixes could be, and I do see some movement in the legislature to rein some of this in. So I imagine that number is going to go up really quickly, because I've said that publicly now as people try to get theirs in. And then success stories. I don't know that we will know for sure on the total success story until the bonds are paid, because the other part of these, nothing in code has them expired. And when you have I've been in local government, and I appreciate everyone in local government, because I'm telling you, you take off your neighbors, you leave your house early in the morning, and you come home really late at night. So it is true service when you're serving in your community, especially on land use, because there is nothing you are ever going to do that is more controversial than land use. Trust me, I've done it. And I audit people, so I have some pretty good comparisons here. But remember how long these last. We haven't had one actually expire and pay its full bond. And what I do know for sure is we have very large projects. Let me put it this way. Development by its nature is speculative. Projects fail. They fail all the time. When do you know it failed? Because it's typically when the developer can't pay its bills anymore. But the developer doesn't have the bill anymore. The taxpayer does. So that's a good question. And I think one that's yet to be determined. Are there some that are paying their bills just fine? Yep. But I don't think that the public is very aware, because these are new, about that extra tax line. And we have set up all sorts of scenarios in the state auditor's office over how you could actually do these. And I hate to even give a room of strangers all those ideas, because we may create our next Frankenstein this way. But there are holes in how the rules are currently set that you can really exploit this. And that is our concern as the oversight over them. So I hope I answered the question. Any other questions?
So I know you mentioned the tax burden being passed on to the residents. Do you see these more typically than in residential developments?
I see them in both.
In both residential
And
and commercial?
more often than not, they are mixed use.
Okay.
And then, so you're seeing the same line, that in mixed use projects, who has oversight over who pays what percentage of the expense, because there is a different advantage given and different requirements in a commercial development project than there is in the residential. So, but there is no oversight built into this system over how you, other than the straight tax line, who pays that debt back. So it becomes necessary for the creating entity to create that policy. But this is new, and most of them are going to have Piper Sandler, because Piper Sandler sells most of these, come in and tell them, this is a separate legal entity, you have once you approve it, you have no responsibility for it at all. And that's just factually inaccurate, because Piper Sandler is not a governmental accountant, and they are thinking that they are private. But let me just give you a hint on that one. If you're bonding a municipal bond, pretty sure you are now a component unit of that municipality. And that should be the first clue. So there is a market for these bonds because they pay a higher interest rate, which makes them, and they're municipal bonds. Municipal bonds, by their nature, are supposed to be a higher guarantee of payment because it's backed by a government entity. So a higher return, tax-free, backed by a government entity. There's a market for these. And that market is driving what's happening in the development.
So how do you, if I can go to XYZ city and get one of these approved, how as a city do you protect yourself from these things other than, I guess, what is the right way to do this? Because it seems like whatever happens is going to happen. If you tell the developer no, he's going to go somewhere else, get it approved, and come back, and then you're just left with what you said no to anyways. Like, so how do you do it right, and how do you protect yourself?
If I had concerns, which I obviously do because I've done this presentation now, I would be telling my legislators why I have a concern with that. And I will tell you straight up, I'm going to take off my state auditor hat, which is not unbiased. And I'm going to step over here, outside the camera maybe, and tell you that as a prior elected official over land use, I do believe that this should be decided by local entities. That local entity control over land use, I think, is paramount because you know your community better than anyone else. But that is my prior county government experience coming through, and I was trained right. So I would be talking to my legislators, which I have, because I have concerns about that non-contiguous annexation. I think that the legislature should change that and change it quickly. I suspect that they will not change that for the super PIDs, because those are typically state projects, and they like those a lot, so I see those continuing. But on the ones that are approved by counties and cities and that are going into counties and cities, I would be asking for legislative change, and I have. So I hope that answers that. But if it's coming in, the city can set a policy. Right now, the problem with that is it is yet to be legally decided, so then I would look at your attorney to ask whose policy rules. The governing entity where the land use rules are set, or the entity that approved it? Because that has yet to be legally decided. And I'm just an accountant here. I would never claim to be an attorney. I hope that answers the question. I wish I had all of the answers, but I do have all of the problems, just not all of the answers.
I have a question similar to what Jace asked. So if another entity, different county, approves something in Hooper, then who's responsible for collecting tax and dealing with all the tax of it? And
I think it's going to come down to once that one entity, if they started with a project in another county, it's going to go to the tax commission to impose the tax. That's where I think it's going to go, but currently it's probably going to be in the county and there's going to be an argument over who has to impose it, because if they only had a quarter acre for where they started it in one county and then they non-contiguously annexed into another county, then it's going to be that you only have a quarter acre over here. Do you really need to do centrally assessed for that? I see this as an ongoing problem. But right now, probably the most practical is going to be in the county where the biggest part of the project
And then
is.
if it fails, who's responsible for the bill?
This is one of those open-ended questions because that gets really, really complicated. Who has to report it on their financial statements? So right now, the way it is, they're on the state. Now, I don't know how many of you know this, but I audit the state financial statements, and we are currently in that audit. And it has a statutory deadline, and I am waiting for one of these to send me their documents. And I'm going to be having staff working over Christmas right up till New Year's to try to get it out because they can't give me their financial statements. So it is a struggle to get them to give you their financials. And that's just from personal experience now. That it's going to get complicated. So welcome to my joy.
You mentioned the project in Morgan County that you had voted for. Like, two questions. Were you aware when you voted, or did you feel like you had all the information that you know now at the time?
Absolutely not.
And would you have voted differently had you known all the information you know now? And, well, let's answer that one first.
So
I can turn it-
knowing what I know now, it was a difficult vote for me then because at the time, it was not in my ward boundaries. It is now. But the way it was sold at the time is they had already done this in Colorado and it was awesome. And I've had long conversations with the Colorado state auditor who does not have oversight over public infrastructure districts and does not want oversight over public infrastructure districts because they can see exactly what we're experiencing now. So had I known what I know now? No. But at the time, because it was new, it was a great new idea that the legislature came up with that made a economic development project possible within a prior gravel pit that should be the town center. And it was a great idea. We were looking for, I'm in the unincorporated area, we were looking for a tax base so that we could incorporate and have a city center that was great and that we could control and plan. This seemed like a great solution to that problem. But now, remember where I am, I'm in Mountain Green. Everybody will drive past it, and you drive to Snow Basin, you'll see that area. The commercial's not coming out of the ground because you know how much more it costs for that commercial property when they can go right across the street and buy a commercial property without that tax line. So the commercial property is not developing within the pit. It's developing across the street in the non-pit area. So there's a disadvantage for the commercial property to locate within the pit the same way there's a disadvantage to buy a home within a public infrastructure district if you are aware of all of the costs that are involved.
You mentioned it was an additional $325 tax base, but how big of an area was that, and how long was the term for?
So it would have been the 30 years with the 10-year extension on it. They have promised them 25 years, but I think all of that is going to be dependent on how much they've collected to be able to pay it back. Because like I said before, it's like my answer before, success depends on did it actually get fully paid and did it dissolve at the end? Because the other hole in these is there is nothing in statute for how they dissolve. And if I know anything from SAD experience is that government, once it has a revenue line, does never like to let it go. So, and think of it this way, 25 years on a road, how many of you have had to repave a road in less than 25 years? You will pay for the infrastructure and be replacing the infrastructure before that original debt is paid. So, and the town center is not there.
How big of an area was it?
So are you familiar with, how familiar is everyone with Mountain Green? If you make the corner to go, you can see all the homes have gone in, and now Golden West is the only commercial property that's 5
So if it's not being developed in commercial, does that mean you guys are technically behind on the payments of what you thought you would be?
I don't know, because I'm not over there anymore. I'm not in charge there anymore, because I left in at the end of 2000, so.
Well, theoretically then?
Theoretically, I don't know, because I don't get to see their financing, and Morgan County is not included in their financial statements, so that might be why because they don't know that they have to. But the other one, so technically, I would guess that they're not behind, but that's one of the reasons why it's $325 a month for those that are there.
So if the commercial were to develop with that line item drop from 325,
In theory, it could. Because I don't know, because remember, the PID board that has that decision is separate from the county. So the developer has that decision still.
Just for accuracy, that's $325 per month. If it was a $500,000 home, we're using that as the median home, so that's an average being recorded and whatnot.
Right, thank you.
Yes.
$1 million.
Can you also explain a little bit about the problem with boundaries and mapping and how that's causing issues with counties and stuff?
Yeah. So when they can uncontiguously annex like this, you have to be really good with your GIS mapping. And I have found through sad experience that most of the state is not good at GIS mapping. So it becomes very difficult for the oversight body to then determine what the boundaries are and who you're collecting it from. So it's getting really, really complicated. And then when you have a county that has 25, it gets even more complicated. Are you sure you got the right amount from the right person to then pay that bond? So as these grow, we see that oversight. Did I get it? The oversight becomes even more complicated as they grow.
It's 43 in that county now.
Oh, sorry, 43 in that one county. That has, yeah. It gets complicated really, really quickly. So,
Do you find that the people on the board, these PID boards, are county council or city council?
no, they're 100% developers because they have to be the property owner, and typically it would be a conflict of interest if you voted for a PID that you were in. So I still think in local government, I'm not so sure about state, but I know in local government that is unethical by the rules. So you shouldn't be voting for one that you own. You shouldn't be appointing yourself to a board of property that you own. So I'm not seeing that. But when the public infrastructure district is owned by the developer, now remember how this goes in development. Typically, property gains value every step along the development process. So it becomes very lucrative for the person who got the approval for the PID to then sell it to somebody else who's doing it. It's then they don't report that back to the city, county, or the state auditor's office, the lieutenant governor's office, who the new board members are. So when we reach out to the city, they have no idea. And so then it's up to us to track it, which is why I find out about it when they're issuing a bond. So, sad but true, the way I know how much money they have in bonds is through a third-party reporting entity on bonds.
Is there can you put something in that development agreement that they report back to the city council? Like, does that hold up? Or is that?
I would highly recommend it, but it is still up to the city for the oversight on it to make sure that they understand. And that as those ownerships change, you're not always the first to know. You should be, because you have oversight if you're the city or the county, but they don't always tell you. And that's just, we have 54% compliance, and that's with me hiring a full-time employee to go out and track who they are and where they are. And that's
As
just
soon as that developer sells it, then you're dealing with a different.
Pardon me?
If that developer sells the project, then you're dealing with whoever bought the bond to.
whoever, so typically, not even before they get to the bond, they'll sell it once it's approved because it's raised in value, and then all the way along the line, anytime that they have a step up in value, you can have another developer step in. So when you have a big project like, let's think Wasatch Peaks Resort, they have a $300 million bond. So if you think back to Big Sky, that's patterned after that's the city. It's patterned Yellowstone Club in Big Sky, Montana. It failed 3 times before that project was successful. But if you issued the $300 million bond to the developer at the beginning, what happens if the project fails? I'm asking because I don't know. And that's the point, is because these are new and we're dealing with a very lucrative financing position for the developer there, it is up to the city and the county to put the boundaries there in their policy and enforce it as much as possible. Because you can set a lower rate, but then you have to be watching them all the way along the part of the project. And like I said, they don't even want to tell you who the board is, and they never report. I have yet to hear a county or city tell me what the project is costing along the way, because they should be reporting to the counties and the cities the cost of that project and how much that they expect to go into that property tax line for their bond. They're not hearing that. The first they're hearing is the bond issuance.
But if you say no, they're just gonna go to some other city and get approved. So like.
I
guess if
really,
there's
really
not-
hate that part. I really do, but you're right. And that's my concern and why I think I got asked to come. Because, yeah, that's my concern, is with that non-contiguous annexation, you no longer have control, but you'll probably have responsibility for it, whether you approved it or not, or it's on your financial statements or not. Because if you've got a project within your community that isn't working out, does it help or hurt?
So what Hooper says no, they go to Weaver County Commission, and they say yes.
This is why I keep doing this
I guess they're.
Hi, Jim Harvey.
I'm just like,
No, Jim knew I was coming, I told him, so maybe he'll watch, but, yeah, I keep
I'm just trying to
saying it
figure
out
out,
loud.
find a way to protect the city to say, well, we at least want to control what is coming in. But even if you say no, because you don't want the overhead of the tax liability or whatever it is, you don't want the project in here, they're just gonna backdoor it in.
Well, what I would say is, from an oversight perspective, I am trying to stay neutral and point out where I think you can put in what guardrails you can. But I do think it is necessary for whoever approves this to understand what they're doing to the communities as well. So that's why we're talking about it. Development by its nature is speculative. And when you're taking this kind of a project on to this and this kind of debt, it is worth taking all of the steps necessary to make sure you are thinking through all the possibilities. And that's why I'm encouraging you to do that, is think it through. Is it a viable project? Because if it wasn't viable, with the developer paying all of the costs, and then you are asking the taxpayer for the next 30 to 40 years to pay it.
Probably 50 now, it came out to 50 year mortgage,
I did hear that. They were suggested that. I wouldn't recommend that one either, because that's leasing.
So how does this go with the governor's build plan of him preempting where these high, like this seems right down his path of, oh, we hate the federal government telling us what to do, but we're gonna tell all you cities what to do with your.
I can tell you where local government, you were raised right. So that's because that's where I'm always at on it, is I do believe that this is a local control issue, and it should remain a local control issue. I am an independently elected state auditor for a reason. I don't answer to the governor, and I don't answer to the legislature. I probably will have a really good opponent in the next go-around because I keep saying those two things and I keep pointing these things out. But my job is independent of those two bodies and oversight. So that's why I disagree with the governor, and I do it often. So I am free to say that and pay the cost. But anyway, these are all good questions. Any other questions? All right. Well, I am a ray of sunshine everywhere I go, as you can tell. I am really fun at parties. So thank you for your time tonight. I appreciate it. I know you had a road coming through that will bring all sorts of fun and joy as well. So I appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.